I've been dreading making this video. On the third day of this 5-day section, I utterly destroyed my phone. Because my phone was destroyed, I don't have any video or pictures of my own. So this video, you're going to see this face talking a lot. All right, let's get to it. The plan. There was an impending closure 31 miles north of Stevens Pass because of the Airplane Lake fire. I was hoping to get through it before it officially closed. There was no official alternate yet because it wasn't actually closed yet. Later, I would discover the detour was 17 miles long to avoid the 7-mile closure. The official alternative for the Dome Peak fire left the trail at Swaddle Pass, about 90 miles north of Stevens Pass. You had a couple of options from there. I chose to hike to Holden to stay the night and catch a shuttle to Lucerne the next morning where I could take a ferry to Stehekin. Instead of getting back on the trail in Stehekin, you had to hike over Eagle Pass to Mazama to avoid a Blue Lake fire closure. This would be some of the steepest hiking on the whole trail and would be 55 miles long, although you could hitch the last 5 miles along Highway 20. This was all to avoid a 3-mile closure. A quick aside, while at Stevens Pass, I discovered Jimmy Buffett had died, so I added Margaritaville to my playlist. I learned all the words to the song on the many climbs between Stevens Pass and Manning Provincial Park. I left Stevens Pass the morning of Labor Day, but the wet and cold was keeping most of the crowds away. Over the course of Labor Day weekend, I saw a lot of people. A lot of them were really concerned about bears. I passed hikers with bear cans, although they weren't required. I also saw people with bear bells, bear spray, and even a pistol. The few people I saw while leaving Stevens Pass looked miserable and wet and were walking in the other direction, back to civilization. A couple of miles in, I passed the side trail to Skykomish Outfitters, where I resupplied the day before. The hefty price tag still burned a little. I thought about Hammer, who stayed the night at the Outfitters the night before. I ran into Hammer on the last section. I had hopped over a rock to cut off a bit of a switchback. He was behind me and yelled at me. I was sure he was joking, but turns out he was serious. Perhaps he thought I caused some erosion, which I didn't, or he thought I was cheating. Either way, he was still pissed when I saw him at the Outfitters. I guess that was another good reason not to stay there. With no pictures to jog my memory, I don't remember much more about that first day. I did not reach the proposed closure, but I got close. I stayed at Pass Creek at mile 2492. The next morning, I just had 6 miles to get to the proposed closure and 7 miles to get through it. I took no breaks until I was done. At one point, I could see smoke. Here's a sketch I made. Every so often I got a whiff of smoke, but it smelled much worse at the start of Washington. At the other end of the proposed closure, I saw a fire closure sign and a couple taking a break. The male half of the couple did not seem happy about hiking around or the fact that I'd hiked through. Shortly after that, I ran into a woman who was hiking south. She asked about the closure. I showed her the photo I had taken of the fire. I could still do that because my phone wasn't dead yet. Based on that input, she decided to hike through also. I stopped at a difficult water crossing for dinner. I ran into a gentleman with a thick accent. I later would find out he was from Norway, and his trail name was Eduardo Bottlehands. I passed his tent at a little creek with only one tent site, so I stealth camped a little further along at mile 2517, the second 25-mile day in a row, which is pretty good for Washington. I learned a valuable lesson at this stealth spot. Blueberry plants put out a complex, tough, shallow matrix of roots, which are really difficult to dig through. It's too bad the plants did not have any berries on them, or maybe it would have been worth the trouble. At some point during these 2 days, I heard that the Dome Peak fire closure ended. Could theoretically go straight to High Bridge and catch the shuttle to Stehekin like a regular year. Since I already had reservations to ride from Holden Village to Lucerne and for a ferry ride on Lake Chelan, I decided to stick to my original plan. Besides, I'd read a lot about the village and I wanted to see it. Historically, it was a copper mining town, but now it was a Lutheran church retreat. It had been through some bad times. After the mine closed, the church bought the land for $1. In recent years, the retreat had been closed a few times for fires and due to environmental cleanup efforts. The mine tailings caused high levels of iron in the local watershed, but that was all cleaned up now. Around midday, I hit an alpine area where I hiked through a large colony of hoary marmots. I got a great video of walking by the biggest hoary marmot ever. He sat atop a large rock at about eye level. I circled around him on a lazy switchback. He turned and faced me as I passed, bravely defending his community. That lost video is why I so hate the fact that I killed my phone. How do you think I did capturing the moment? I wanted to stay at the Swaddle River Bridge that night, which would be a 26-mile day. It had lots of camping, a water source, and a primitive privy. At the top of the alpine area, it was very windy, so when I came to the first group of trees on the other side, I stopped for lunch. I'd been leapfrogging a young woman all day, and she was already there. Normally I would have kept going, but it was really the only place to stop for miles. I asked if it was okay if I shared the shelter of trees with her. She said it was fine. I don't recall her name, but she told me her story. She had fallen behind a group of her friends and was trying to catch up. She hadn't seen them in days, but was hoping to meet them at the bridge that night. Up until now, the trail in Washington was really good. That all changed after the alpine section. Blowdowns on that third day were the worst I would experience. Getting around blowdowns requires a lot of work. Sometimes you have to go out of your way. Other times you have to climb jungle gym style through them. And other times you have to go up and down steep, slippery slopes. I was tired and therefore clumsy. I had fallen a couple of times. I was muddy and scraped up, but fine. By the time I got to the last blowdown of the day, it had gotten dark. I should have stopped, but I was only a half mile from the bridge. The blowdown was a single tree blocking the trail a little higher than waist high. Someone had chopped a little foothold up on top. I swung my left leg up to the foothold. My right foot was on the edge of the trail, which turned out to be a log covered with a thin film of gravel. The momentum of throwing my leg up made my right foot slip on the slick surface. Due to the awkward position, I fell on the log that was on the edge of the trail, my right thigh making contact first. My right cargo pant pocket holds my phone. The impact bent my phone like a banana. It immediately became useless. I was pissed, so dumb. I might have cried, but I definitely yelled out at the universe. I spent the next half mile thinking of all the things I could have done differently. When I got to the bridge, I found a couple of couples from Norway. I asked if I could hike with them to Stehekin. My plans to go to Holden Village were dashed. I was going to have to follow the plans of whoever took pity on me. I kept an eye out for the young lady I passed earlier because I knew she was going straight to Stehekin. The Norwegian couples were planning on taking an alternative that would add an extra day. I never saw the young lady, so I stuck with the couples. In my tent that night, I sent a bunch of panicked messages to Julie. She had to help me cancel my Holden Village and Lucerne plans. She gave me some great advice to calm me down and focus. Just keep hiking. Just keep hiking. The Norwegians were very relaxed. They were hiking the trail the way it should be. They were getting up late and doing short days. After the snow-inspired panic at the beginning of the trail, they had learned their lesson. Well, unfortunately, I was not in the headspace I could appreciate their Zen-like philosophy. 10 miles in a day with them, we came to the Image Lake Junction where the couples would begin their route-extending alternative. They said it would be beautiful, but I wanted to get to civilization and get a new phone. While we were standing there at the junction, Eduardo rolled up. They were all Norwegian, so they could speak with ease. It was decided I would hike with Eduardo until Stehekin. Eduardo was in a hurry. He was trying to catch up with friends before the 9 a.m. shuttle to Stehekin the next morning. Because of the lazy start, I only got 23 miles that day, but Eduardo got more than 25. We stopped at a few campsites looking for his friends before we settled on a creekside spot just 8 miles from the shuttle stop at High Bridge. At the campsite, we shared a fire with a young man who was just hiking in the area looking for good rock climbing spots. Eduardo was a man of few words, but mused quite a bit about being less than 90 miles from the Canadian border. Our campfire mate definitely picked up on our excitement. We were both very motivated to get going early. We started out the day with headlamps in the pre-dawn darkness. We got to the bridge a little after 8 a.m. Eduardo's friends were there. They were all from Europe, some of them from Germany, others were from Norway. Hammer was also there. He apparently had gotten over me stepping across the switchback. He was really excited to be nearly done with his Triple Crown. That's right. He had already hiked the AT, the CDT, and over 2,500 miles of the PCT. Apparently, never missing a single step. A ranger that worked at the nearby cabin was going to join us for our ride to Stehekin. He told us about the fire closure just ahead of us. He said the fire was nowhere near the trail, but the trail crews were using the PCT to get to and from the firefighting areas, and that was why the trail was closed. Interestingly, he volunteered the information that no rangers with law enforcement powers were in the area. He seemed to be encouraging us to hike through as long as we didn't disrupt the fire crew's work. We still had plenty of time before the shuttle, so the ranger encouraged us to go down to the bridge and look down. The kokanee salmon were spawning beneath it. For a $10 fee, the bakery shuttle would drive us to the bakery, wait for us to get something, and then drive us the rest of the way to Stehekin. At the bakery, I got a cafe mocha, a cinnamon roll, and an order of biscuits and gravy. I waited to eat the biscuits at Stehekin. I enjoyed the coffee and pastry as the nervousness about my busted phone slowly faded away. Later that day I would be in Shailen, where I could get a new one. On the drive to Stehekin, I saw the first and last bear of my PCT adventure. It was a small bear, but not nearly as small as the tree it was trying to hide behind as we drove by. I had hours to kill in Stehekin. After getting my ferry ticket, I visited the cafe and market. I could have totally resupplied and kept going to the border if only I didn't need a phone from Shailen. When the ferry was in port, they shared their Starlink Wi-Fi with the hikers, so everybody hung out at the tables under the market near the port. I saw a guy I had met earlier on the trail. I think he was a friend of Nate's. He was debating hiking straight through to Canada. His plan was to stop just before the 2.5-mile closure and then hike through that closure during the night when he wouldn't interrupt the trail cruise. The young lady I met before the bridge talked about going with him. I met Magic Hobbit's friends. He had decided to go his own way after Stevens Pass. They weren't sure if he was ahead of him or behind him. I even visited the North Cascades National Park Ranger Station right there in Stehekin. I still had time, so I grabbed a book from a little free library, which I read while I waited. I was on the ferry with plenty of time to spare before the 12:45 departure. There were some emotional goodbyes. Some groups were splitting up here. Some were hiking through the closure, some were hiking the official alternative, and others were taking the ferry to Shailen to get a ride to Mazama. The groups that were splitting up were likely not to see each other again. The ferry ride across Lake Chelan, the longest lake in Washington, took 2.5 hours. As soon as I reached the city of Shailen, the pressure was on again. Without my phone, I had to get across town to the Walmart. A ferry employee gave me a map, and so I started the 3-mile walk to Walmart. I shopped like I was on a mission. I got a phone and the necessary resupply items in no time. The phone was a Bluetooth track phone. The phone was a mere $30, and the plan for a month only cost $30. Unfortunately, setup wasn't easy. The code on the service plan card was damaged while I scraped off the silver coating. After talking to customer service a couple of times, it was sorted though. It was great to talk to Julie again. It had only been a couple of days, but it seemed so much longer. Now that I finally had a working phone, I could start looking for a place to stay for the night and a way to get to Mazama. I joined the Washington Trail Angel Facebook group. It was incredible. A trail angel named Jessica would be in Shailen the next morning to take riders to Mazama. Amazing. Thank you, Jessica. Finding a place to stay was tougher. Every hotel and campground was booked solid. I could walk back over 2 miles to the city park, which apparently was letting everyone stay for free. But by the time I got a ride set up and determined lodging wasn't going to happen, it was well past dark. So I stayed right there at Walmart. Behind this door was a border of trees where I could hunker down. I hung out on the side of the building next to a power socket. I charged my new phone, my battery pack, and the Garmin until late. I ate a sandwich from the Walmart Subway for dinner. Only for the second time on the trail, I cowboy stealth camped. I packed up as the sun rose and headed into Walmart to use the facilities. I still hadn't showered yet, but I was able to get pretty clean. I had donuts, coffee, and orange juice for breakfast. Jessica arrived as promised. She had already picked up another hiker from the town's park. I believe the other hiker was a young woman from France. She didn't talk much because of the language barrier, so Jessica and I did all the talking. We arrived in Mazama before noon. The restaurant in town wasn't open yet, so I walked over to the Lion's Den. Lion and Raven weren't there, but I plugged a few bucks into the donation box and took a shower. There was a couple of other hikers lounging around, but I was anxious to get going. So back over the river to Mazama Public House that was just opening. I got a salad and a poke bowl. Man, how quickly your fortunes change on the trail. I wanted a pretzel for dessert, but they were out, so I settled on a second beer instead. Way too soon, I was walking down the road with my thumb out. I stopped by the market for a pint of ice cream. I ate it right there on the front stoop. Right after I started down the road, I got a ride, but only to the town's airport. A local had something to pick up there. I had barely gotten started again when a young couple who were at the market at the same time I was picked me up. They were going to take the market sandwiches for a little hike and have a picnic in the woods. The dirt road to the trailhead was a harrowing one, but the driver wasn't bothered by it at all. At the trailhead, I signed and checked the trail log. Sunny D was just 3 days ahead of me, Skriegel 4, Beach 6, Karate Kid 8, and Icarus was 10 days ahead. Icarus and I crossed the California-Oregon border together. That guy's fast. Speaking of people ahead of me, having a phone again, I had heard that Peter, tall boy, had finished 3 days earlier. He was already on his way back to Germany. It was nice to have a camera again to document the trip. I ran into Hazel, aka Mountain Goats, who I knew hikes with the Codgers. She was on her victory lap. If you don't get a permit to enter Canada, you have to turn around and go back to Mazama. They call it a victory lap because you see all the people behind you. Everyone is psyched. To be done or almost done is quite a celebration. I congratulated her, and she told me that the rest of the codgers were right behind her. So I had time to get my camera out and catch them on the trail. I was able to talk to them briefly. I told them how I had hung out with their fellow codger legend back in Hikertown, and of course how much I appreciated their recon. I got to return the favor a bit. They wanted to know the condition of the water source that was coming up. I would later learn from their channel that Raven would pick them up that night and bring them back to Mazama. They were done with the PCT until the next year, when they'd fill in the 400 miles they skipped. I camped at mile 2632, just 23 miles from the border. I had a Moscow mule I bought at Walmart with my dehydrated dinner. No snake count, so trail stop checklist. High Bridge, Stehekin, Shailen, check. Mazama, check. Harts Pass, check. Man, it's close now.